I received a terrifying phone call from Detective Rodriguez at 11:47 p.m. His voice was shaking as he told me that they found Derek Thornton crouched in the bushes outside my safe house location with a loaded weapon, zip ties, and detailed photos of my daily routine. The detective asked if anyone else knew about the safe house location. My blood ran cold as I realized only one person could have revealed it, my sister Jessica, who had sworn she was just trying to help me see reason about my paranoid overreaction to the stalking threats. 3 months earlier, my life was completely different. My name is Manuel, and I worked as a software engineer at TechFlow Solutions in Austin, Texas. I was 32 years old, living in a decent one-bedroom apartment in the warehouse district, and dating Ashley Martinez, a graphic designer who made me laugh every single day with her terrible jokes about coding bugs. I thought I was finally building something meaningful with my life, after years of struggling to establish my career in tech. My apartment overlooked Lady Bird Lake, and I would spend weekend mornings on my balcony with coffee, working on personal coding projects while Ashley sketched in her notebook beside me. We had been together for 18 months, and were talking about moving in together permanently. I was earning $75,000 a year at TechFlow, which felt like a fortune compared to the freelance web development work I had done throughout my 20s. Everything changed the moment Derek Thornton walked into our office on a Monday morning in February. Derek was maybe 28 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive charcoal suit that seemed completely out of place for a junior developer position. He carried himself with a confidence that immediately rubbed me the wrong way, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Derek had supposedly graduated from Stanford with a computer science degree, though I later discovered this was completely fabricated. His resume listed impressive internships at major tech companies, all of which turned out to be lies carefully constructed to get him hired at TechFlow. During his first week, Derek claimed to be eager to learn from experienced developers like me, but there was something calculating in his pale blue eyes that made me deeply uncomfortable. My supervisor, Janet Williams, assigned Derek to work as my assistant on our most important project, a revolutionary machine learning algorithm I had spent 3 years developing. This algorithm could predict market trends with 93% accuracy by analyzing social media sentiment, news patterns, and economic indicators in real time. The technology was worth millions of dollars and represented the culmination of everything I had learned about artificial intelligence and financial modeling. Derek started his manipulation campaign immediately, but so subtly that I didn't recognize it at first. He would ask seemingly innocent questions about my work, requesting copies of my code for what he called reference purposes. Derek volunteered to help with technical documentation, insisting he needed complete access to my proprietary algorithm to understand the full scope of our project deliverables. He was extraordinarily persistent about gaining access to every aspect of my work. Derek would stay late at the office, claiming he wanted to study my code to become a better programmer. He offered to create backup systems and organize my files, always with reasonable explanations that made it difficult to refuse his help without appearing paranoid or possessive. What I didn't realize was that Derek wasn't just documenting my work for learning purposes. While I thought he was taking notes to improve his programming skills, Derek was actually copying every line of code I had written and forwarding it to people outside the company. He had been hired specifically to steal my algorithm, and his entire persona as an eager junior developer was an elaborate performance designed to gain my trust. The betrayal became clear when I accidentally discovered Derek's real schedule during my 3rd week working with him. I had forgotten my laptop charger at the office and returned around 8 p.m. to retrieve it. Through the conference room windows, I saw Derek meeting with our CEO, Marcus Sullivan, along with 2 men in expensive suits whom I didn't recognize. Derek was giving a detailed presentation about machine learning algorithms, using slides that contained my exact code and research methodologies. He spoke confidently about his innovative approach to market prediction, presenting my 3 years of work as his own brilliant solution to complex financial modeling challenges. Marcus Sullivan was clearly impressed, taking notes and asking technical questions that Derek answered using my research. I watched in shock as Derek explained the algorithm's architecture, using terminology and concepts that I had developed independently through months of trial and error. He discussed the mathematical models with expertise that he couldn't possibly have acquired in the few weeks since joining our team. The presentation lasted over an hour, during which Derek thoroughly demonstrated his supposed mastery of technology that belonged entirely to me. When I confronted Derek about this meeting the next morning, He immediately turned the situation around with practiced skill. Derek claimed that Marcus had asked him to present a summary of our project work, and that he had been trying to give me credit throughout the presentation. He acted hurt and confused by my accusations, suggesting that I was being paranoid and possessive about collaborative work. Derek escalated his manipulation by filing formal complaints with Human Resources, accusing me of creating a hostile work environment for junior staff members. He claimed that I had become increasingly aggressive and unreasonable about sharing project information, making it impossible for him to contribute effectively to our team efforts. HR scheduled a meeting with me the following Friday, where Derek presented carefully edited email exchanges that made me appear hostile and possessive. He had somehow altered our electronic communications to remove context and create the impression that I was harassing him about his legitimate work responsibilities. Derek also provided statements from other employees who claimed I had been acting strangely and making them uncomfortable with paranoid accusations. The evidence was overwhelmingly against me, despite being completely fabricated. Derek had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, knowing that his theft of my work would eventually be discovered. He had created an elaborate narrative in which I was an unstable employee who had become obsessed with preventing others from contributing to our shared project. Marcus Sullivan called me into his office that same afternoon and informed me that my employment was being terminated immediately for workplace aggression, paranoid behavior, and harassment of junior staff members. Security officers escorted me out of the building while Derek watched from the conference room, a barely perceptible smile crossing his face as I was walked past his desk. That same day, Derek received my promotion to senior developer and was given full credit for the algorithm that represented 3 years of my professional life. The company announced his advancement as recognition for his innovative work on artificial intelligence applications in financial services, with no mention of my contributions to the project. I immediately contacted an employment attorney, but Derek had been incredibly thorough in his preparation for this outcome. He had manipulated evidence, convinced coworkers to provide false statements, and created a paper trail that supported his version of events. My attorney, David Chen, told me that without concrete proof of Derek's theft, we had virtually no chance of success in court. The legal fees alone would cost more than I could afford, especially given my sudden unemployment and the likelihood that Derek's false accusations would make it difficult for me to find new work in Austin's tech industry. David advised me to focus on finding new employment, rather than pursuing what appeared to be an unwinnable lawsuit against my former company. That's when Derek's true campaign of terror began. He wasn't satisfied with merely stealing my career and destroying my professional reputation. Derek wanted to eliminate me completely, as a potential threat to his stolen success, and he was willing to use any means necessary to achieve that goal. Derek started appearing at my job interviews within days of my termination. He would call potential employers, introducing himself as a concerned former colleague who felt obligated to share information about my mental health issues and history of workplace violence. Derek claimed that I had suffered a psychological breakdown after losing my job and was now stalking former coworkers as a way to cope with the rejection. Every opportunity I pursued seemed to disappear after Derek made contact with hiring managers. I would have promising initial interviews, only to receive sudden rejections with vague explanations about concerns regarding my professional references or cultural fit with their organization. Derek was systematically destroying my ability to work anywhere in the Austin technology community. Derek escalated his harassment by following me to my apartment building multiple times each week. He would park his black Toyota Camry across the street and watch my windows, sometimes for 3 or 4 hours at a time. Derek made no effort to hide his surveillance, wanting me to know that I was being watched and that he could appear anywhere at any time. He left threatening messages under my apartment door with increasing frequency. The notes started with relatively mild warnings like, "This isn't over between us and you. Brought this on yourself," but quickly became more specific and menacing. Derek began including details about my daily routines, proving that he had been conducting extensive surveillance of my activities. One particularly disturbing note described my morning jog route around Lady Bird Lake, including specific landmarks and the exact times I typically passed each location. Another message listed the grocery stores I frequented and the approximate times of my weekly shopping trips. Derek was demonstrating that he knew everything about my personal life and could approach me anywhere at any time. My relationship with Ashley deteriorated rapidly under the pressure of Derek's relentless harassment. She was terrified and confused by his behavior, unable to understand why anyone would go to such extreme lengths to torment someone over a workplace dispute. Ashley tried to be supportive, but Derek's escalating threats were affecting every aspect of our lives together. Derek started calling Ashley's workplace at Meridian Design Studios, speaking to her supervisor and coworkers with fabricated stories about my dangerous mental state and history of domestic violence. He claimed that Ashley was in potential danger from my unstable behavior, and that her employer should be aware of the situation for her safety and the safety of other employees. These calls created an impossible situation for Ashley at work. Her supervisor, Maria Rodriguez, was concerned about potential liability issues and asked Ashley uncomfortable questions about our relationship and my mental health. The stress of defending me while dealing with her own fear about Derek's threats became overwhelming for Ashley. On a Tuesday evening in early April, Ashley broke up with me in the parking lot outside my apartment building. She was crying as she explained that she couldn't handle the situation anymore and was afraid of what Derek might do to her or her family. Ashley said she still cared about me but couldn't risk her safety and career for a relationship that had become a source of constant terror. The final breaking point came 3 weeks later when Derek broke into my apartment while I was at a job interview in Round Rock. I had been gone for approximately 4 hours, meeting with the development team at a small software company that specialized in educational applications. The interview had gone well, and I was feeling optimistic about finally escaping Derek's influence when I returned home. I immediately knew something was wrong when I found my front door unlocked. I always double-check the deadbolt before leaving, especially given Derek's escalating harassment. My hands were shaking as I pushed the door open and stepped into my living room, calling out to see if anyone was inside. The apartment appeared normal at first glance, but as I walked toward the kitchen, I discovered dozens of photographs scattered across my dining table. Derek had somehow entered my bedroom during the night and taken pictures of me sleeping, capturing images from multiple angles over what appeared to be several different occasions. The photographs were disturbing beyond description. Some showed me sleeping peacefully, while others captured me in vulnerable positions that made it clear Derek had been standing directly beside my bed. Across each photograph, Derek had written the word "soon" in red ink, along with specific threats about what he planned to do when we had our final conversation. I called 911 immediately, but the responding officers explained that the evidence wasn't sufficient for an arrest warrant. Detective Rodriguez, who took my statement, said that Derek had been careful to avoid making direct threats that could be prosecuted under Texas criminal law. The break-in itself was difficult to prove without signs of forced entry, and Derek's attorney could argue that the photographs were taken during a previous authorized visit. Detective Rodriguez recommended that I consider relocating temporarily while the police built a stronger case against Derek. He put me in contact with the Central Texas Victim Advocacy Coalition, an organization that provided safe housing for people facing severe harassment and stalking situations. Through the Advocacy Coalition, I found a safe house located outside Cedar Park, Texas, about 30 miles northwest of Austin. The property was a small 2-bedroom cabin tucked away in the woods, accessible only through a private road that wasn't visible from any main thoroughfares. The location was supposed to be completely confidential, known only to law enforcement officers and advocacy organization staff members. For the first time in months, I felt like I might actually be safe from Derek's relentless pursuit. The cabin was equipped with a security system, and the Advocacy Coalition provided me with emergency contact numbers for local law enforcement. I could finally sleep through the night without worrying about waking up to find Derek standing beside my bed. My sister Jessica lives in Dallas, where she works as a social media manager for Stellar Influence Marketing, a successful company that manages online presence for lifestyle influencers and small businesses. Jessica is 29 years old, 3 years younger than me, and we had always maintained a close relationship despite living in different cities. Jessica graduated from the University of Texas at Dallas, with a degree in communications and digital marketing. She's incredibly talented at her job, managing social media campaigns for clients with millions of followers and helping small businesses build their online presence from scratch. Jessica understands the internet and social media platforms better than anyone I know, which made Derek's manipulation of her expertise particularly devastating. When I first told Jessica about Derek's stalking behavior, she was immediately supportive and encouraging. She helped me research legal options for dealing with workplace harassment, and even offered to let me stay at her apartment in Deep Ellum if I needed a place to hide. Jessica was furious about what Derek had done to my career, and wanted to help me fight back against his campaign of intimidation. However, As weeks passed and I moved to the safe house in Cedar Park, Jessica began questioning my version of events. She couldn't understand why the police hadn't arrested Derek if the evidence against him was as clear and compelling as I claimed. During our weekly phone conversations, Jessica started asking pointed questions about my mental state and whether I might be misinterpreting Derek's actions or motivations. Jessica's skepticism grew when I described some of Derek's more elaborate harassment tactics. She found it difficult to believe that anyone would go to such extreme lengths over a workplace dispute, especially someone who appeared to be successful in their new position at TechFlow Solutions. Jessica began to wonder if I was experiencing some kind of psychological crisis that was causing me to misinterpret normal interactions as threatening behavior. Her doubt was compounded by my increasingly isolated lifestyle in the safe house. I had stopped going to job interviews, avoided contact with former colleagues, and seemed to be hiding from the world rather than actively addressing my problems. From Jessica's perspective, this behavior looked more like mental illness than rational response to genuine threats. Jessica decided to conduct her own investigation into Derek's background, using her professional skills in social media research and digital marketing. She spent hours examining Derek's online presence, looking for evidence that might support or contradict my accusations about his character and behavior. What Jessica discovered seemed to completely contradict everything I had told her about Derek. His LinkedIn profile showed him as a highly successful professional, with glowing recommendations from colleagues at multiple technology companies. Derek's work history appeared impressive and legitimate, with no gaps or inconsistencies that might suggest deceptive behavior. Derek's personal social media accounts painted him as a thoughtful, community-minded individual who volunteered regularly at local animal shelters and participated in charity fundraising events. His Instagram feed was filled with photos of him helping at food banks, participating in environmental cleanup projects, and mentoring young people interested in technology careers. More troubling for Jessica were the testimonials she discovered from people who claimed to be Derek's current and former coworkers. These carefully crafted posts described me as an unstable former employee who had become obsessed with Derek after being terminated for performance and behavioral issues. The testimonials claimed I had made threatening phone calls to the office and shown up at TechFlow Solutions multiple times, demanding to speak with Derek about imaginary grievances. These testimonials were sophisticated and convincing, written by people with established social media presence and professional credentials. Derek had spent considerable time and money creating fake personas and recruiting accomplices to support his fabricated narrative about our situation. Derek had contacted people in Jessica's extended social media network, presenting himself as a concerned former colleague who was worried about my deteriorating mental health. He approached mutual connections through professional networking sites and local community groups, always appearing reasonable and articulate in his concerns about my well-being. The manipulation reached its peak when Derek contacted Jessica directly through Instagram direct messaging. He sent her a thoughtful, well-written message, explaining that he was the real victim in our situation, and that he was genuinely worried about my psychological state and potential for violence. Derek's message to Jessica was masterfully crafted to exploit her professional expertise and personal concerns about my welfare. He explained that I had suffered a severe psychological breakdown after losing my job and had begun stalking him as a way to cope with feelings of rejection and professional failure. Derek claimed that my harassment was escalating and that he was afraid I might hurt myself or others if I didn't receive appropriate mental health treatment. Along with his initial message, Derek provided Jessica with what appeared to be compelling evidence of my supposed harassment campaign. He sent screenshots of threatening emails that looked like they came from my personal account, audio recordings of angry voicemails that sounded like my voice, and edited security camera footage that seemed to show me following him through parking garages and office buildings. The evidence was entirely fabricated, but Derek had invested significant resources in making it appear authentic. He had used voice synthesis technology to create fake audio recordings and hired professional video editors to manipulate security footage in ways that would convince casual observers. Jessica was initially skeptical of Derek's claims, but the evidence he provided seemed overwhelming and consistent. She couldn't understand why someone would go to such elaborate lengths to frame an innocent person, and Derek's apparent fear and vulnerability made his story seem credible. Derek suggested meeting Jessica in person so they could discuss the situation more thoroughly. He proposed a public location in Dallas where Jessica would feel safe, emphasizing that he understood her need to be cautious when meeting someone she didn't know personally. They met at Addison Coffee Roasters on a Saturday afternoon, and Derek's in-person performance was flawless. He arrived looking professional but slightly disheveled, as if the stress of my supposed harassment was affecting his sleep and personal care. Derek spoke quietly and seemed genuinely frightened when describing my alleged behavior. During their conversation, Derek provided Jessica with additional evidence of my harassment, including photographs that appeared to show me following him to his apartment complex and restaurants where he met with friends. He showed her a notebook where he had documented every incident of my supposed stalking, complete with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of my behavior. Derek broke down emotionally while describing how my harassment had affected his life and career. He claimed that I had threatened his elderly parents in San Antonio and shown up at his apartment building multiple times with what neighbors described as a weapon. Derek begged Jessica to help him convince me to seek psychological treatment before the situation escalated to violence. The most persuasive aspect of Derek's performance was his apparent knowledge of my personal history and family relationships. He knew details about my childhood, my struggles to establish my career, and my recent breakup with Ashley. This information made Derek's story seem more credible, though he had actually gathered it through extensive online research and surveillance. Jessica felt terrible for initially doubting Derek's version of events. She became convinced that I was experiencing severe paranoid delusions and that Derek was indeed an innocent victim of my deteriorating mental state. Derek had successfully exploited Jessica's love for me and her professional expertise to turn her into an unwitting ally in his campaign against me. Derek carefully asked Jessica if she knew where I was currently staying, explaining that my family needed to know my location in case my mental health crisis escalated to the point where intervention became necessary. He expressed concern that I might harm myself if my delusions continued to worsen without appropriate treatment. Jessica called me that evening with a completely different tone than our previous conversations. She demanded to know my safe house address for what she described as emergency family purposes, claiming that our parents in San Antonio were desperately worried about my welfare and needed to be able to reach me if something happened. I was confused by Jessica's sudden change in attitude, but I trusted my sister completely and couldn't imagine that she would ever do anything to put me in danger. Jessica had always been my closest family member and strongest supporter, so her request seemed reasonable even if her tone was unusually demanding. After considerable pressure, I reluctantly shared the Cedar Park location with Jessica, making her promise that she would only use the information in a genuine emergency involving our family. Jessica assured me that she understood the sensitivity of the situation and would never do anything to compromise my safety. Following our conversation, Jessica became completely convinced that I was suffering from paranoid delusions about Derek. She believed that my fears were entirely irrational and that I had created an elaborate conspiracy theory to explain my job loss and relationship failures. Jessica thought that the best way to help me was to demonstrate that my fears were unfounded and that Derek posed no actual threat to my safety. She developed a plan to prove that Derek couldn't possibly find me in my supposedly secret location, thereby convincing me that my hiding was both unnecessary and counterproductive. Jessica believed that by showing me how easily discoverable my safe house was, she could shock me into recognizing the irrationality of my fears and convince me to seek psychological help. Jessica's plan was motivated by genuine concern for my welfare, but Derek had manipulated her emotions and professional judgment to turn her love for me into a weapon against my safety. She had no idea that her actions would provide Derek with exactly what he needed to complete his plan to eliminate me permanently. On Tuesday afternoon, April 23rd, Jessica created a Facebook post that would fundamentally change everything about my situation and nearly cost me my life. She had spent the morning researching my safe house location using her professional skills in social media investigation and digital marketing, gathering detailed information about the property and surrounding area. Jessica uploaded multiple high-resolution photographs of my safe house, including images of the cabin itself, the private road leading to the property, and distinctive landmarks that would make the location easy to identify. She included the complete street address, along with GPS coordinates and detailed driving directions from various points in Austin and Cedar Park. The Facebook post was titled, "My brother thinks he's being stalked, but this is where he's hiding, in plain sight." Jessica included Google Street View images of the area, screenshots from real estate websites showing the cabin's rental history, and even a map highlighting the property's relationship to nearby businesses and residential areas. Jessica tagged multiple Austin area community groups, neighborhood watch pages, and true crime discussion forums, where she was an active member. Her intention was to demonstrate how easily findable I was, believing this would convince me that my hiding was pointless, and that Derek could never have located me through normal means. The post included detailed commentary from Jessica about my supposed mental health crisis and her concerns about my paranoid behavior. She described my fears about Derek as irrational delusions and asked for community support in convincing me to seek psychological treatment. Jessica painted herself as a concerned sister, trying to help a troubled brother recognize the unrealistic nature of his fears. Within 30 minutes of Jessica's post going live, Derek had discovered it through his network of accomplices who had been systematically monitoring social media accounts connected to my family and friends. Derek immediately screenshot the post and shared it with 3 private investigators who had been helping him search for my location for several weeks. These accomplices were part of Derek's elaborate and well-funded campaign to eliminate me as a threat to his stolen career. Derek had hired professionals with experience in surveillance and intimidation, paying them significant sums to track my movements and gather intelligence about my hiding places and support network. Derek's team had been systematically contacting my former coworkers, college friends, and distant relatives for weeks, claiming to be conducting background checks for potential employers or government security clearances. Through these contacts, Derek's investigators had been gathering detailed information about my habits, relationships, and possible hiding places throughout Central Texas. Local residents near my cabin started reporting suspicious activity almost immediately after Jessica's post was shared across various social media platforms. Mrs. Margaret Patterson, who lived approximately 300 yards from my safe house, called the Travis County Sheriff's Department about a black van with tinted windows that had been parked along the main road since 2 p.m. The van had out-of-state license plates from Louisiana and appeared to contain multiple occupants who were using binoculars and camera equipment to observe the area around my cabin. Mrs. Patterson had lived in the rural area for over 15 years and immediately recognized that the vehicle and its occupants didn't belong in the quiet residential community. At 4:30 p.m., I received a panicked phone call from Sarah Williams, the coordinator of the Central Texas Victim Advocacy Coalition Safe House program. Sarah had been monitoring social media platforms for any mentions of their properties using automated alert systems designed to detect potential security breaches. Sarah's voice was shaking as she explained that my location had been completely compromised through a social media post that had already been shared over 100 times across various Austin area Facebook groups. She strongly advised me to leave the safe house immediately and seek alternative accommodation, while the Advocacy Coalition developed a new security plan. When I checked social media myself, I was horrified to discover that Jessica's post had gained significant traction throughout the Austin community. The comment section was filled with people discussing my supposed mental health crisis, many of whom seemed to know more details about my employment termination and relationship with Derek than I had ever shared publicly. Several commenters were actively defending Derek's character and describing him as a victim of my harassment and stalking behavior. These comments contained specific details about incidents that had never actually occurred, suggesting that Derek's network of accomplices was actively participating in the social media discussion to reinforce his fabricated narrative. I called Jessica immediately, my hands shaking with anger and terror as I waited for her to answer the phone. When she finally picked up, I could barely control my voice, as I demanded an explanation for what she had done to my safety and security. Jessica initially defended her actions with complete conviction, arguing that she was trying to help me recognize the irrational nature of my fears about Derek. She insisted that if Derek could find me so easily through a simple Facebook post, then I was never actually safe in the first place and needed to face the reality of my situation. Our conversation quickly became heated as I tried to explain the mortal danger she had put me in by revealing my location to Derek and his accomplices. Jessica seemed unable or unwilling to grasp that Derek had been actively searching for my whereabouts, and that her post had provided him with exactly what he needed to complete his plan against me. She maintained that I was overreacting, and that Derek was probably not even aware that her post existed. Jessica argued that a successful professional like Derek wouldn't be monitoring social media for information about someone he had supposedly never met, and that my fears about his intentions were symptoms of my deteriorating mental state. As our argument continued, I could see Derek's black van slowly driving past my cabin through the front window. My blood turned cold as I realized that Jessica's betrayal had already resulted in Derek locating my supposedly secure safe house. The vehicle moved slowly along the private road, with its occupants clearly conducting surveillance of the property. I ended the call with Jessica and immediately contacted 911 to report the suspicious vehicle and potential threat to my safety. The emergency dispatcher assured me that sheriff's deputies were being dispatched to my location, but the response time would be approximately 20 minutes due to the remote location of the cabin. Derek's surveillance team retreated when they noticed Mrs. Patterson watching them from her front porch, but they relocated to a position about half a mile away where they could continue monitoring the cabin without being easily detected by patrol officers or concerned neighbors. When the Travis County Sheriff's deputies arrived at my location, they conducted a thorough search of the immediate area but found no signs of the suspicious vehicle or its occupants. Deputy Martinez took my statement about Derek's stalking campaign and the social media post that had compromised my location, but explained that they couldn't take action against Derek without evidence of his direct involvement in the surveillance. After the patrol cars left the area, I felt more vulnerable and exposed than at any point since Derek's harassment campaign had begun. The safe house that had provided me with security and peace of mind for several weeks now felt like a trap where Derek could approach me at any time, without interference. I spent the rest of the evening packing my essential belongings and preparing to abandon the safe house, knowing that Derek now had detailed information about my exact location and could return at any time to complete whatever plan he had developed against me. The isolation that had once protected me from Derek's surveillance now seemed like a liability that would make it easier for him to approach me without witnesses or immediate access to help. I was alone in the woods with someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to break into my home and threaten my life, and my own sister had provided him with a roadmap to find me. That night I barely slept, despite my exhaustion and stress. Every sound outside the cabin made me jump, wondering if Derek had returned under cover of darkness to finish what he had started months earlier. I kept my cell phone fully charged and ready to call for help, while checking the locks on all doors and windows repeatedly throughout the night. Jessica sent me several text messages apologizing for our argument, but still maintaining that her actions had been justified and helpful. She seemed completely unable to understand the magnitude of the danger she had created or accept responsibility for compromising my safety through her misguided attempt to prove a point about my supposedly irrational fears. Derek returned to my cabin area alone at 11:30 p.m. on Wednesday night, believing that I would be asleep and therefore easier to handle without interference from neighbors or law enforcement. He had spent the entire day studying the layout of the property, using satellite imagery and reconnaissance information gathered by his surveillance team during their afternoon visit. Derek approached the cabin on foot through the wooded area behind the property, carrying a large sports bag containing everything he needed for what he intended to be our final confrontation. He had planned this moment meticulously for weeks, developing multiple scenarios and backup plans to ensure that his mission would be successful, regardless of how I responded to his presence. Inside the sports bag, Derek carried a loaded 9mm handgun that he had purchased illegally through one of his private investigator accomplices. He also brought plastic zip ties, duct tape, and a variety of tools that he planned to use to restrain and intimidate me during the final phase of his campaign. More sinister than the weapons were the carefully prepared pieces of evidence that Derek intended to plant at the scene to support his fabricated version of events. Derek had created a detailed suicide note in my handwriting, confessing to months of stalking him and expressing my intention to hurt him and his family before taking my own life. Derek had practiced replicating my handwriting for over 6 weeks, using samples from documents he had accessed during his time at TechFlow Solutions and additional writing samples he had obtained through his surveillance activities. The forged suicide note was virtually indistinguishable from my actual handwriting and contained specific details about my supposed mental breakdown and obsession with Derek. Derek's ultimate plan was far more sophisticated than simple revenge or intimidation. He intended to break into my cabin, restrain me with the zip ties and duct tape, and then stage an elaborate scene that would make it appear as though I had attacked him with a deadly weapon, forcing him to shoot me in self-defense. The planted evidence would support Derek's story that I had finally snapped and attempted to murder him in a delusional rage. Derek would claim that he had come to the cabin to try to convince me to seek psychological help, only to be attacked by someone who was completely detached from reality and determined to harm innocent people. Derek had even prepared false evidence suggesting that I had been planning attacks against other TechFlow Solutions employees and members of Derek's family. He carried fake photographs and documents that would support his claim that I was a dangerous individual who posed a threat to multiple innocent people throughout the Austin area. However, Derek had made a critical miscalculation in his assessment of my neighbors and their level of vigilance regarding suspicious activity in their quiet rural community. Mrs. Patterson had been specifically watching for unusual behavior around my property since learning about the social media post that had compromised my location. When Mrs. Patterson saw Derek's dark figure moving through the woods toward my cabin at nearly midnight, she immediately called 911 and reported a potential break-in in progress. She provided the emergency dispatcher with detailed information about Derek's appearance and location, enabling law enforcement to respond quickly and effectively. Detective Rodriguez and 2 Travis County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene just as Derek was approaching the back door of my cabin. They discovered him crouched in the bushes beside the building, wearing dark clothing and gloves while carrying the sports bag containing weapons and planted evidence. When the officers demanded identification and an explanation for his presence on the property, Derek immediately began implementing his backup plan. He claimed that he was protecting himself from my threats and had come to the cabin because he was afraid I was planning to harm him or his family members. Derek attempted to present himself as a terrified victim who had been forced to take protective action against someone who was stalking and threatening him. He claimed that I had been sending him death threats and that he had evidence proving my dangerous mental state and intention to commit violence. The search of Derek's sports bag revealed not only the weapons and restraints, but also the extensive collection of planted evidence he had prepared to frame me for crimes I had never committed. Police discovered the forged suicide note, fake photographs, and fabricated documents that were designed to support Derek's narrative about my supposed mental breakdown and violent intentions. Most damaging to Derek's credibility was the discovery of his cell phone, which contained months of detailed documentation about his stalking campaign against me. The phone revealed text message conversations with his paid accomplices, including the private investigators who had been helping him track my movements and gather intelligence about my personal life. The text messages showed Derek's coordination with his hired team, including specific instructions about surveillance techniques and payments for various services related to his harassment campaign. The phone contained detailed logs of my daily routines, photographs taken without my knowledge, and even recordings of phone conversations that Derek had somehow intercepted. Detective Rodriguez realized that Derek had been using sophisticated surveillance technology and professional-grade equipment to monitor my activities. His phone contained evidence of illegal wiretapping, unauthorized access to my personal accounts, and coordination with multiple accomplices in an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The investigation of Derek's phone also revealed the full extent of his manipulation of Jessica, showing that his contact with my sister had been far more calculated and extensive than anyone had realized. Derek had been catfishing Jessica for weeks before approaching her directly, using fake social media profiles to gather information about her personality, interests, and professional expertise. Text messages between Derek and his accomplices showed that they had spent considerable time developing psychological profiles of my family members, identifying potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to turn them against me. Derek's manipulation of Jessica was just one component of a larger strategy designed to isolate me from all sources of support and assistance. The messages revealed that Derek had even accessed Jessica's social media accounts without her permission, using information gathered through his fake profiles to monitor her posts about me and our family. Derek had been tracking Jessica's emotional state and professional activities to determine the best approach for manipulating her into becoming an unwitting ally in his campaign against me. When Detective Rodriguez called me at 12:15 a.m. to inform me of Derek's arrest, I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the immediate threat was finally over, but horror at learning how close Derek had come to successfully implementing his plan to frame and murder me. Detective Rodriguez explained that Derek was being held without bail on multiple charges including stalking, attempted murder, conspiracy, and illegal weapons possession. The evidence gathered from his phone and sports bag provided clear proof of his criminal intentions and sophisticated planning. Most shocking was the revelation that Jessica had been a victim of Derek's manipulation rather than a willing accomplice in his scheme. Derek had exploited her professional expertise and genuine concern for my welfare to turn her into an unwitting weapon against my safety and security. The psychological manipulation Derek had used against Jessica was as sophisticated and calculated as any confidence scheme, designed to exploit her emotions and professional skills while making her believe that she was helping rather than harming me. Derek had turned Jessica's love for me into a tool for my own destruction. The following morning brought revelations that were even more shocking than Derek's arrest and attempted assault. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen contacted me at 7 a.m., explaining that the search of Derek's apartment had uncovered evidence of a much larger criminal conspiracy involving corporate espionage, systematic harassment of whistleblowers, and potential homicide. Derek's apartment in downtown Austin contained an entire room dedicated to surveillance equipment and files related to his campaign against me. FBI agents discovered professional-grade recording devices, telephoto camera lenses, computer equipment for intercepting electronic communications, and detailed maps showing every location I had visited over the past 6 months. More disturbing were the extensive files Derek had maintained about my personal life, dating back 8 months before he had even applied for the position at TechFlow Solutions. These files included background information about my family members, educational history, previous employment, financial records, and even medical information that should have been completely confidential. The FBI realized that Derek's hiring at TechFlow Solutions had not been coincidental or opportunistic. He had been researching me and planning his infiltration of my workplace long before he ever submitted his fabricated resume and fake credentials. Derek's entire employment at the company was part of an elaborate criminal scheme that extended far beyond simple theft of intellectual property. Agent Chen explained that Derek had been working directly with Marcus Sullivan, the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, in a sophisticated operation to steal my algorithm and eliminate me as a potential threat to their illegal activities. My revolutionary machine learning system wasn't just valuable to TechFlow. Sullivan had been secretly selling it to international competitors, generating millions of dollars in hidden revenue that never appeared in official company financial statements. The FBI had discovered evidence that Marcus Sullivan had been operating an industrial espionage network for over 5 years, stealing proprietary technology from his own employees and selling it to competitors while systematically destroying the careers of anyone who might expose his criminal activities. Sullivan's operation was far more extensive than anyone had realized. He had hired Derek and several other operatives to infiltrate technology companies throughout Texas, identifying valuable intellectual property and eliminating the employees who had developed it. Derek was just one member of a larger criminal organization that specialized in corporate theft and employee intimidation. Agent Chen showed me evidence that Sullivan had paid Derek $65,000 for what internal documents referred to as comprehensive problem resolution. Derek's original assignment had been to steal my algorithm and get me terminated from TechFlow Solutions. But when I began pursuing legal action, Sullivan had authorized Derek to escalate his tactics to include stalking, harassment, and ultimately murder. The FBI had discovered a detailed paper trail of payments from Sullivan to Derek and his team of accomplices, funding their surveillance equipment, legal fees, and other expenses related to their campaign against me. Sullivan had been financing Derek's operation through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to hide his involvement in the conspiracy. Investigation revealed that Sullivan had used similar tactics against other TechFlow Solutions employees who had posed threats to his illegal operations. The FBI identified 3 other technology workers who had been targets of comparable harassment campaigns, with 2 successfully driven from the industry, and 1 who had died in what was initially ruled a suicide, but was now being reinvestigated as a potential homicide. Derek's manipulation of Jessica was revealed to be part of an even larger plan to isolate me from all sources of support and assistance. The FBI found evidence that Derek had been preparing to plant child pornography on my personal computers, ensuring that any attempt I made to expose Sullivan's corporate conspiracy would be overshadowed by criminal charges that would destroy my credibility completely. Sullivan had already contacted media outlets throughout Texas and prepared press releases announcing my supposed arrest for corporate espionage, possession of illegal materials, and stalking of former colleagues. The plan was to publicly destroy my reputation while Derek eliminated me physically ensuring that the truth about TechFlow's criminal activities would never be exposed to law enforcement or the media. Agent Chen explained that the FBI had been investigating TechFlow Solutions for suspected corporate espionage, but had lacked the evidence needed to build a successful prosecution case. Derek's arrest and the discovery of his extensive files provided the breakthrough they needed to expand their investigation into Sullivan's entire criminal enterprise. The FBI raid on TechFlow Solutions headquarters revealed hidden computer servers containing stolen algorithms from multiple technology companies throughout the United States and internationally. Sullivan had been operating as the central hub of an industrial espionage network that had stolen intellectual property worth an estimated $50 million over 5 years. Derek's full confession to federal investigators revealed that Sullivan's criminal organization had targeted dozens of technology workers across multiple companies and geographic regions. The operation specialized in identifying valuable intellectual property, infiltrating the companies where it was being developed, and eliminating the employees who had created it through a combination of professional sabotage and personal harassment. Most validating for me personally was learning that my original suspicions about workplace corruption at TechFlow Solutions had been completely accurate and justified. Everything I had tried to report to management before my termination was not only true but represented just a small fraction of Sullivan's extensive criminal activities. My attempts to expose the illegal sale of proprietary technology had made me a target for elimination, but they had also been morally and legally justified responses to serious criminal behavior. The FBI confirmed that my algorithm was indeed being sold to international competitors in violation of federal laws governing technology transfer and intellectual property protection. Agent Chen assured me that my cooperation with the federal investigation would be crucial to ensuring successful prosecution of both Derek and Sullivan. The evidence I could provide about the development of my algorithm and Sullivan's knowledge of its illegal distribution would be essential components of the government's case against the entire criminal conspiracy. The scope of Sullivan's operations was staggering in its sophistication and reach. He had recruited accomplices throughout the technology industry, established relationships with international buyers for stolen intellectual property, and developed systematic methods for eliminating employees who posed threats to his criminal enterprise. Derek had been Sullivan's most effective operative, combining technical expertise with psychological manipulation skills that made him extremely dangerous to his targets. The FBI estimated that Derek had been responsible for destroying the careers and lives of at least 6 technology workers over the previous 3 years, with my case representing his most ambitious and elaborate operation. The investigation revealed that Derek's fabricated credentials and professional history had been created by Sullivan's organization using sophisticated identity theft and document forgery techniques. Derek's entire persona as a successful technology professional was an elaborate fiction designed to help him infiltrate target companies and gain access to valuable intellectual property. Sullivan's criminal enterprise represented one of the most extensive cases of corporate espionage and employee intimidation ever investigated by federal law enforcement in Texas. The combination of industrial theft, systematic harassment, and attempted murder made it a priority case for the FBI's Corporate Crime Division. Agent Chen interviewed me extensively over several days about my original work at TechFlow Solutions and my experiences with Derek's harassment campaign. During these detailed conversations, I suddenly remembered something that would prove crucial to the federal case against both Derek and Sullivan. Before my termination from TechFlow Solutions, I had created encrypted backup files of all my original code, research notes, and development documentation for the machine learning algorithm. These files were stored on a secure cloud server that I had completely forgotten about during the trauma and stress of Derek's stalking campaign. The backup system had been part of my standard practice for protecting intellectual property during the development process. I had always been cautious about ensuring that my work was preserved and documented, particularly for projects that represented significant time investment and potential commercial value. Agent Chen was extremely interested in these backup files, explaining that they could provide definitive proof of my ownership of the algorithm that Derek had stolen and Sullivan had been selling illegally. The encrypted files would establish a clear timeline of my development work and demonstrate that I was the original creator of the technology in question. Working with the FBI's technical specialists, I was able to retrieve and decrypt the hidden backup files over the course of several days. The process required multiple layers of authentication and security verification, but ultimately we recovered everything I had created during my 3 years of development work on the algorithm. The evidence contained in my backup files was overwhelming and irrefutable. The files clearly established my role as the original creator of the machine learning system, including detailed documentation of my research methodology, mathematical models, and programming techniques. The timestamps on the files proved that I had been developing the algorithm long before Derek had even been hired at TechFlow Solutions. More importantly, the backup files contained email communications and internal company documents that proved Marcus Sullivan's direct involvement in the theft and illegal sale of my intellectual property. The files included correspondence showing Sullivan's awareness of my work's commercial value and his instructions to Derek regarding the acquisition of my research. Agent Chen explained that these files would be crucial evidence in the federal prosecution of both Derek and Sullivan. The documentation provided clear proof of the conspiracy between the two men and established the timeline of their criminal activities against me. With this evidence secured, I made the difficult but necessary decision to testify against both Derek and Sullivan in federal court. This was terrifying given everything I had endured during Derek's stalking campaign, but I knew that my testimony could help ensure justice for myself and Derek's other victims throughout the technology industry. I began working closely with the victim advocacy organization that had provided my original safe house, helping them develop improved security protocols for corporate whistleblowers who faced retaliation from their employers. My experience had revealed significant gaps in existing protection systems, and I wanted to ensure that future clients would receive better security and support. The advocacy organization was grateful for my input and asked me to serve on their advisory board for cases involving workplace harassment and corporate retaliation. My first-hand experience with sophisticated stalking techniques and professional sabotage provided valuable insights that could help protect other workers facing similar threats. The most challenging aspect of my recovery process was repairing my relationship with Jessica. I drove to Dallas to meet with her in person, wanting to address the damage that Derek's manipulation had caused to our family relationship while helping her understand how she had been victimized by his psychological warfare tactics. When I arrived at Jessica's apartment in Deep Ellum, she immediately broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably as she apologized for her role in compromising my safety and security. Jessica had been living with tremendous guilt since Derek's arrest, terrified that her actions had nearly resulted in my death and unable to forgive herself for being manipulated into betraying me. Jessica revealed that Derek's psychological manipulation had been far more extensive than the FBI had realized, based on his phone records and text messages. Derek had shown her fabricated evidence that I was planning to harm our parents in San Antonio, claiming that my mental breakdown had made me dangerous to our entire family. Derek had convinced Jessica that by exposing my location through her Facebook post, she was actually protecting our parents and other family members from my supposedly violent intentions. He had manipulated her love for our family and her professional expertise in social media to turn her into an unwitting weapon against my safety. We spent several hours talking through everything that had happened, with Jessica helping me understand the specific techniques Derek had used to manipulate her emotions while I helped her process her own victimization. Together, we worked with FBI investigators to document Derek's psychological manipulation tactics, providing evidence that could help protect other families from similar schemes in future cases. Jessica decided to use her social media expertise and professional experience to help other stalking victims document harassment and build evidence for law enforcement. She began creating online resources and educational materials, explaining how stalkers use social media manipulation and helped victims recognize the warning signs of elaborate psychological campaigns. Her work with stalking victims became a passion project that helped Jessica process her own trauma while contributing to important advocacy work. She partnered with law enforcement agencies throughout Texas to provide training on social media investigation techniques and digital evidence preservation. I started a blog documenting corporate retaliation against whistleblowers, sharing my story in detail, and connecting with other technology workers who had faced similar experiences with workplace harassment and professional sabotage. The response from the technology community was overwhelming, with hundreds of people reaching out to share their own stories. My blog gained significant attention when several major technology publications picked up the story and featured it in their coverage of corporate crime and employee protection issues. The combination of industrial espionage, sophisticated stalking tactics, and attempted murder made for compelling journalism that resonated with readers throughout the technology industry. The media coverage led to invitations to speak at technology conferences, congressional hearings, and law enforcement training seminars about the need for stronger protections for corporate whistleblowers and victims of workplace retaliation. I began traveling throughout the United States, sharing my experience and advocating for policy changes that could prevent similar cases. I filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against TechFlow Solutions, Marcus Sullivan, and Derek Thornton for wrongful termination, conspiracy, theft of intellectual property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit sought both financial compensation and policy changes that would prevent the company from engaging in similar criminal activities in the future. The media attention surrounding my case caused TechFlow Solutions' stock price to crash dramatically, as investors learned about the extent of the company's criminal activities. The board of directors began discussing bankruptcy proceedings to avoid the massive legal settlements and criminal fines they were facing from multiple federal and civil cases. Within weeks of my story becoming public, I received job offers from 3 major technology companies who wanted to hire me publicly, as a demonstration of their commitment to ethical business practices and employee protection. The offers included significant salary increases, equity stakes, and leadership roles that represented genuine career advancement beyond my previous position. Derek's legal team attempted to negotiate a plea deal that would reduce his charges in exchange for cooperation with federal investigators, but I refused to accept any agreement that would allow him to avoid the full consequences of his criminal actions. I wanted Derek to face maximum penalties both for what he had done to me and to ensure that he could never threaten anyone else. The federal prosecution team supported my position, explaining that Derek's case would serve as an important precedent for future prosecutions of corporate espionage and employee intimidation schemes. They wanted to send a clear message that sophisticated harassment campaigns and attempted murder would be prosecuted to the full extent of federal law. The federal trials of Derek Thornton and Marcus Sullivan became major news events throughout Texas, and the technology industry covered extensively by both local and national media outlets. The trials provided the first comprehensive public examination of sophisticated corporate espionage schemes and the extreme measures that some companies will take to silence whistleblowers and steal intellectual property. Derek's trial lasted 3 weeks, during which federal prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of his stalking campaign, attempted murder, and participation in Marcus Sullivan's criminal conspiracy. The jury heard detailed testimony about Derek's psychological manipulation tactics, his use of professional surveillance equipment, and his elaborate plan to frame and kill me. My testimony was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case against Derek. I spent 2 days on the witness stand, describing every aspect of Derek's harassment campaign from his initial infiltration of TechFlow Solutions through his final attempt to murder me at the safe house. The jury was visibly shocked by the sophistication and cruelty of Derek's methods. Jessica also testified about Derek's manipulation of her emotions and professional expertise, helping the jury understand how he had exploited family relationships to isolate me from sources of support and assistance. Her testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated how Derek's psychological warfare had affected innocent family members who had tried to help me. Derek was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, stalking, attempted murder, and weapons violations. Judge Patricia Williams noted during sentencing that Derek's sophisticated planning and psychological manipulation made him a continuing danger to society, justifying the lengthy sentence despite his lack of prior criminal convictions. Marcus Sullivan's trial was even more extensive, lasting 6 weeks, as federal prosecutors presented evidence of his 5-year criminal enterprise involving industrial espionage, employee intimidation, and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial revealed the full scope of Sullivan's operations and the devastating impact his crimes had on technology workers throughout the industry. Sullivan was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The judge described Sullivan's organization as one of the most sophisticated corporate crime schemes ever prosecuted in federal court, noting that his actions had caused millions of dollars in economic damage and destroyed numerous careers. TechFlow Solutions was forced to pay me a settlement of $4,700,000 and issue a comprehensive public apology, acknowledging their role in the conspiracy against me. The settlement included admission of wrongdoing and agreement to implement new policies protecting employees who report suspected criminal activities. The company was ultimately dissolved within 8 months of the criminal convictions, unable to survive the legal costs, criminal fines, and reputational damage from the scandal. The dissolution resulted in the loss of over 200 jobs, but it also eliminated a criminal organization that had been systematically destroying the careers of honest technology workers. Sullivan's other victims received compensation, totaling $15 million from various civil settlements and criminal restitution orders. Two of the technology workers who had been driven from the industry were able to restart their careers with assistance from the advocacy organizations and support networks that had emerged from the case. I used a significant portion of my settlement money to establish the Manuel Torres Foundation for Corporate Whistleblower Protection, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal support, safe housing, and career assistance for employees who face retaliation after reporting illegal workplace activities. Jessica became the foundation's communications director, using her social media expertise and personal experience to raise awareness about corporate retaliation and connect victims with resources and support. Her work helping other families navigate similar crises became a source of healing and purpose that helped her process her own trauma from Derek's manipulation. The foundation's advocacy work gained significant attention in Congress, leading to my invitation to testify at hearings that ultimately resulted in the passage of the Corporate Whistleblower Protection Act. This federal legislation made retaliation against employees reporting illegal activities a specific federal crime, with mandatory minimum sentences for violations. The new law also established federal funding for victim advocacy programs and safe housing for employees facing workplace retaliation. The legislation was named the Torres Act in recognition of my case and the Foundation's advocacy work, representing a lasting legacy that would protect future generations of workers from corporate intimidation. My relationship with Ashley was gradually rebuilt over the course of several months. She contacted me after the news coverage began, expressing remorse for abandoning me during the crisis and admiration for my courage in fighting back against Derek's campaign. We started dating again slowly, building our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding about trauma and recovery. Ashley's experience during Derek's harassment had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of supporting loved ones during difficult times, even when the situation seems overwhelming or dangerous. Our renewed relationship was stronger than before, because it was based on honest communication about our fears and needs rather than assumptions about each other's capabilities. Detective Rodriguez was promoted to lead a new task force within the Travis County Sheriff's Department, specifically focused on investigating corporate retaliation and complex harassment cases. The success of my case had demonstrated the need for specialized law enforcement training in handling schemes that involve both criminal behavior and corporate misconduct. The Safe House program operated by the Central Texas Victim Advocacy Coalition received a major funding increase after my story became public. The media attention surrounding my case had highlighted both the importance of their work and the need for enhanced security measures to protect victims of sophisticated stalkers and corporate criminals. Over the following 2 years, the Manuel Torres Foundation helped pass 37 state laws throughout the United States, strengthening protections for stalking victims and corporate whistleblowers. We worked with state legislators to close legal loopholes that had allowed people like Derek and Sullivan to operate with relative impunity for extended periods. 3 major technology companies adopted comprehensive ethical guidelines based on recommendations from my foundation for handling employee concerns about suspected illegal activities. These guidelines included independent reporting mechanisms, protection against retaliation, and mandatory training for management personnel on recognizing and preventing workplace harassment. I wrote a book about my experience titled Fighting Back: How I Survived Corporate Espionage and Stalking to Build a Movement for Justice. The book became a national bestseller and is now required reading in business ethics courses at over 50 universities throughout the United States, helping to educate future business leaders about the importance of protecting honest employees. 1 year after Derek's sentencing, I stood at a podium addressing 5,000 engineers and executives at the National Technology Ethics Conference in San Francisco. Jessica sat proudly in the front row as I announced new initiatives to protect corporate whistleblowers and connect victims of workplace retaliation with comprehensive legal and emotional support resources. Looking out at that diverse audience of technology leaders, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me from hiding in fear in a Texas cabin to becoming a nationally recognized advocate for justice and corporate accountability. The experience had taught me profound lessons about resilience, family relationships, and the power of truth to ultimately triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal schemes. The most important lesson I learned was that sometimes the people who love us most can unknowingly become weapons in the hands of those who wish us harm. Derek's manipulation of Jessica had nearly cost me my life, but it had also demonstrated the incredible power that love and concern can have when they are exploited by skilled psychological manipulators. However, I also learned that truth, persistence, and courage can transform even the darkest betrayal into a powerful force for justice and positive change. Jessica's initial betrayal of my trust had ultimately become the catalyst for exposing Derek's entire criminal operation and bringing down Marcus Sullivan's industrial espionage network. Trust must be rebuilt carefully and thoughtfully, but when it is founded on genuine understanding, forgiveness, and shared commitment to justice, it becomes stronger and more resilient than it ever was before. Jessica and I had not only repaired our relationship, but had transformed it into a partnership dedicated to protecting other families from similar manipulation and abuse. Most importantly, I discovered that fighting back against injustice doesn't always mean fighting alone. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from turning personal pain into protection for others facing similar battles. The Manuel Torres Foundation had helped dozens of families navigate corporate retaliation and workplace harassment, creating a network of support that extended far beyond my individual case. The man who had once hidden in terror in the woods had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar threats, proving that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. Derek's attempt to destroy my life had ultimately created something far more powerful and lasting than anything he could have imagined. A movement to protect vulnerable workers from corporate predators, and a community of survivors helping each other heal and rebuild their lives. As I concluded my speech that day in San Francisco, I looked directly into the television cameras and addressed the viewing audience with a question that had driven all of my advocacy work over the previous 2 years. Have you or someone you know ever experienced workplace retaliation for trying to do the right thing? Or faced harassment for reporting suspected illegal activities in your workplace? I believe that by sharing these difficult stories and supporting each other through the recovery process, we can create work environments where honesty and integrity are consistently protected and rewarded, rather than punished. Every person who comes forward with their story makes it easier for the next victim to find the courage to seek help and fight back against corporate intimidation. I want to thank everyone who has supported the Foundation's advocacy work and the thousands of brave individuals who have shared their own stories of courage in the face of corporate retaliation and workplace harassment. Please take a moment to like this video if my story has resonated with your own experiences or concerns about workplace justice. Subscribe to stay connected with our ongoing advocacy efforts and policy initiatives designed to strengthen legal protections for corporate whistleblowers and victims of workplace harassment. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from knowing that they are not alone in their fight for justice and accountability in their professional lives. Your continued support makes all the difference in our ability to protect vulnerable workers and hold powerful corporate interests accountable for their criminal actions. Together, we can ensure that no one else has to endure what Derek and Sullivan put me and my family through during those terrifying months of harassment and intimidation. Until next time, keep fighting for what you know is right, and remember that even in our darkest and most frightening moments, we have the power to create positive change that extends far beyond our own individual lives and touches the hearts of countless others who need hope and inspiration to continue their own battles for justice.